All right, ready for a deep dive into the life of a true Victorian legend.
I'm ready. Who are we diving into today?
Sir Richard Francis Burton. You might know him as the translator of the Arabian Nights.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg with this guy, believe me. He was a soldier, explorer, linguist, writer. Honestly, the list could go on.
He really was a man of many talents, wasn't
He
he?
was, and those talents often took him to the edges of the known world, even beyond the boundaries of what Victorian society considered acceptable.
Sounds intriguing.
Well, we've got excerpts from his Wikipedia page in front of us, and it already paints a pretty wild picture.
Okay, so what's the mission for today's deep dive?
We're going to try to untangle the truth from the legend, and maybe figure out what made this guy tick. For starters, Wikipedia tells us that Burton was fluent in something like 29 languages.
Wait, 29? Seriously?
Seriously. I mean, it's almost unbelievable.
It's a testament to his insatiable curiosity, I think, and his deep respect for other cultures.
That's a good point.
Unlike some explorers of his time who barged in with a sense of superiority, Burton understood the importance of connecting with people on their own terms, and language was key to that.
That makes sense. You can't really understand a culture if you're only getting a filtered version through translators.
Exactly.
So, speaking of understanding cultures, let's talk about his journey to Mecca.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a casual sightseeing trip, right?
Not at all. In 1853, Burton embarked on the Hajj, that's the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, disguised as a Muslim pilgrim. This was incredibly risky, especially for a European in the mid-19th century.
Right, because Mecca was closed off to non-Muslims. And I imagine the consequences, if he was caught, would have been, let's say, unpleasant.
To put it mildly. But Burton was meticulous in his preparation. He spent years studying Islamic customs, mastering Arabic. He even underwent circumcision to fully maintain his disguise. Talk about dedication to your craft.
That's some next-level commitment. And
Yeah.
this wasn't just about proving he could pull it off. He actually wrote a book about it, right?
He did. Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Al-Medina and Mecca, published in 1855, and it caused quite a stir.
I bet.
It was praised for its vivid descriptions and insights into Islamic culture, but also criticized by some for its, frankness.
It seems like Burton had a knack for pushing boundaries,
Mm.
even with his writing. But before we dive into that, let's talk about another one of his adventures, the search for the source of the Nile.
Ah, yes, the expedition that became the stuff of legends, but also the source of some bitter controversy. In 1857, Burton set off with John Hanningspeak, another ambitious explorer, into the heart of Africa.
And this is where things get interesting, right? Because it wasn't just the dangers of the journey they had to contend with, but also a clash of egos and ambition.
Exactly. Imagine the pressure of exploring uncharted territory, facing disease, harsh conditions, constant danger. Now add in two strong personalities, each determined to be the one to make history, and you have a recipe for, shall we say, some friction.
So what happened? Did they actually find the source of the Nile?
Well, that's where the controversy lies. Speke returned from the expedition claiming Lake Victoria as the source, but Burton disputed this, leading to a very public and bitter feud that captivated Victorian society.
Okay, so we've got Burton the master linguist, Burton the daring explorer who risked his neck in Mecca, and now Burton the rival, caught in the battle for recognition. What's next on the Burton highlight reel?
Well, let's just say Burton had a very...
What happened after he got back from Africa?
He made it back to England,
Okay.
but his adventures weren't over, not even close.
What did he get up to back in England?
Well, he channeled his experiences into writing,
Okay.
but even there, he courted controversy.
This is where we get into his more scandalous side.
We do.
So I'm guessing his writing wasn't all travelogues and tales of daring do.
Let's just say Burton had a very particular interest in topics that Victorian society
Yeah.
deemed inappropriate, shall we say.
Like what?
He was fascinated by sexuality and erotic literature.
And he didn't exactly shy away from exploring those interests, did he? I mean, forming the Kama Shastra Society to publish translations of works like the Kama Sutra and the Perfumed Garden, that took some guts in the 1800s.
It certainly did. You have to remember, this was a time when even mentioning certain bodily functions in polite company was frowned upon.
Right.
Burton's willingness to delve into these taboo subjects was seen as shocking, even dangerous by some.
So he was challenging the very fabric of Victorian morality with his work?
Essentially, yes.
No wonder he was considered controversial.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just his writing, was it? There were also whispers about him being a spy.
Yes, the espionage angle. It's true that while Burton was stationed in Damascus as British consul, he was also sending back reports to the Foreign Office.
Gotcha.
These weren't your typical diplomatic dispatches, though. He wrote about political intrigue, potential uprisings, even provided detailed accounts of local customs and beliefs.
So he was acting as the eyes and ears of the British government in a volatile region.
Yes,
That sounds like walking a tightrope between diplomacy and, well, something a bit more clandestine.
exactly. And it's difficult to say for certain where his diplomatic duties ended and his more, shall we say, unofficial activities began. Some argue he was simply a keen observer, fulfilling his role as a cultural attaché. Others believe he was engaged in something closer to espionage.
It's like he was always operating on multiple levels, blurring the lines between explorer, scholar, diplomat, and maybe even a bit of a rogue agent. With all these talents and accomplishments, you'd think he would have been celebrated by Victorian society. But it seems like he was constantly butting heads with the establishment.
He was definitely not one to play by the rules, that's for sure. His bluntness, his willingness to challenge convention, and yes, the rumors surrounding his personal life didn't exactly endear him to the powers that be.
It's fascinating how society's perception of what's acceptable changes so dramatically over time. Today, Burton's work on sexuality and cross-cultural understanding might be hailed as groundbreaking, but back then, it was enough to make him a social pariah. It makes you wonder what aspects of our own culture will be viewed as shocking or taboo a century from now.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But speaking of societal perceptions and contradictions, we can't talk about Richard Francis Burton without mentioning his wife, Isabel Arundel.
Ah, yes, the devout Catholic who fell for the notorious explorer and translator of erotic literature. That seems like an unlikely pairing, to say the least. What can you tell us about their relationship?
On the surface, they appear to be complete opposites.
Totally.
But despite their differences, they shared a deep and abiding love for each other. Isabel was fiercely devoted to Richard, defending his reputation, supporting his work, even when it meant facing social ostracism.
It sounds like she was more than just a devoted wife. She was his champion, his protector, in a world that often misunderstood him.
Absolutely. And her devotion went beyond the grave. After Burton's death, Isabel made the controversial decision to burn many of his papers and journals.
Wait, she burned them. Why on earth would she do that? Those documents would be invaluable to historians today.
She believed she was acting in his best interests, protecting his legacy from further scandal and misinterpretation. She wanted to control the narrative surrounding his life to ensure he was remembered as she knew him.
That's incredible. Talk about a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you have this incredible act of love and devotion. On the other, the potential loss of invaluable historical insights.
It's a stark reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy. It's a messy tapestry woven from countless individual perspectives and motivations, often with unintended consequences.
No kidding. So we've got this intrepid explorer, a gifted linguist, a controversial writer, a suspected spy, and a complex personal life full of love, loss, and a dash of Victorian scandal. Is there anything this guy didn't do? He never did definitively find the source of the Nile, did he?
He didn't know.
That distinction, if you can call it, that went to his rival, John Speke.
It did.
Though I guess we'll never really know what truly transpired on that expedition.
That's the thing about Burton. Even with all the biographical information we have, a certain mystique surrounds him. It's like he's daring us to unravel the truth, to separate fact from the legend he himself helped create.
Which, knowing Burton, he probably got a kick out of.
Probably.
It's like he's still pulling strings, defying expectations even from beyond the grave. But speaking of separating fact from fiction, his writings must offer some clues, right?
They do, but even those are like puzzles within puzzles.
How so?
Burton wasn't content with simply recounting events as they happened. His travelogues and accounts are full of wit, double entendres, a layer of irony that makes you question what he really thought about the people and places he encountered.
So he was a master storyteller who knew how to keep his audience guessing.
He was.
But at the same time, he was tackling some pretty serious topics. Didn't he face quite a bit of backlash for the frankness of his writing?
Absolutely. Victorian England had very strict ideas about what was considered proper reading material.
Right.
And Burton's work often went beyond those boundaries. He wrote about sexuality, religion, cultural practices, subjects that many of his contemporaries considered taboo.
Which, in a way, makes him a surprisingly modern figure, don't you think?
I suppose so, yes.
I mean, he was challenging social norms, encouraging people to question their assumptions centuries ago. It's something we still grapple with today.
He was definitely ahead of his time in many ways. But that's the beauty of exploring the life of someone like Burton, I think.
What is?
He defies easy categorization. He was a tangle of contradictions, a brilliant scholar, fluent in dozens of languages, a fearless explorer who risked his life in the name of discovery, and a controversial writer who pushed the limits of what Victorian society deemed acceptable.
So, what's the one thing you hope our listener will take away from this deep dive into the life of Sir Richard Francis Burton?
I think Burton's life is a testament to the power of curiosity. He never stopped exploring, never stopped questioning, and never let the limitations of his time dictate the course of his life.
He really was a true original, wasn't he? A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating and often unbelievable life of Sir Richard Francis Burton. We hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore further, to challenge your own assumptions, and perhaps even embrace a little bit of that Burtonian spirit of adventure in your own life. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep exploring.